Hi, and welcome to this edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health. Our mission here at Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live well in spite of your mental health challenge by sharing insights through interviews, practical tools for living well, encouragement, and courage for overcoming all from a Christian perspective. And now, here's your host, Pastor Brad Hafes.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. I'm Brad Hafes, your host. Our purpose here on Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live a faith-filled, rich, and full life in spite of having a mental health diagnosis. And I know I always say you're in for a treat today, but it is another treat. I have somebody here with me online through the use of phone. And he's in St. Louis, and I'm here in Omaha. He's having a snowstorm, and we don't have any, or he's having an ice storm, and we're having just cold, wind. That's it. And I'm glad that we have that and you have the ice. But I want to welcome my good friend and fellow pastor, Jason Moore, to the podcast this morning. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be on here together.
Yes, and for those who don't know you, you are part of our Fresh Hope staff and joined about a year ago, something like that, maybe a little bit more than a year ago.
Well, we first met back in March of 2020.
Oh,
right
yeah.
Before the world shut down.
Yes,
and I've been doing more, I guess, about 18 months now with Fresh Hope.
Maybe I should call you my pandemic friend.
Yes.
You know how some people got puppies during the pandemic? I didn't get a puppy. I got a Jason Moore.
You would have been better off with a puppy. But
So, Jason, tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself and, and how you ended up coming to us at Fresh Hope.
Yeah, so I am a pastor who has spent years preaching, so trying to say just a little bit about myself will be very difficult. So I grew up here in Missouri, moved to Colorado when I was a teenager, and then eventually came back here, worked in television for a little bit, but then the Lord called me away from that and back to Missouri for really to search for seminaries and figure out where I might go next. And I grew up Southern Baptist and learned from a friend of mine that there was a Presbyterian seminary here in St. Louis that I'd probably driven by 100 times and didn't know it was there. But I ended up at Covenant Seminary. The Lord drew me there. I met with my wife there. We got married within 5 months of meeting one another, and we are still married almost 21 years later. We have 3 beautiful daughters. The oldest is about to graduate from high school. But I've been in vocational ministry for, I guess, 20 years now. And most recently, prior to coming on board with Fresh Hope, I was a church planter in a town about 30 miles outside of St. Louis, and wrapped up that work back in August of 2020. For a while prior to that, I've lived with a mood disorder for as long as I can remember. And I looked around. I was pretty unhealthy for the first 5 years of the church plant, realized I needed to make some changes and get healthy. And once I did, realizing what kind of resources were out there and how much better life could be with treatment, I started to look and say, okay, what is the church doing? Why did it take me so long to actually take these steps? Part of it was we didn't talk about these things in my church. We actually tried to hide mental health concerns and pretend that they didn't exist. And so as I started to get better and my marriage improved and ministry improved, I just really thought we need to do this. We need to focus some energy on helping other churches really be aware of what's happening, the needs that people have. And so my wife and I, my wife's a counselor, and we had a plan to start meeting with churches, helping them think through mental and emotional health concerns. And I also coach. I coach people who are in recovery. I coach a lot of pastors now. And so she and I actually started a business. She's counseling a lot. And We had this big plan to do this on our own. And I was talking to a guy out in Denver, Colorado one day who said, before you start doing anything on your own, you need to talk to Brad Hafes. Got a hold of you, Brad, and we have been together ever since. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, folks, it's really nice because Jason is younger than me, and but it's a friendship that's really a blessing. We've both been through a lot because of our mental health, but we've also had the joys as well as the difficulties of ministry, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So, one of the things that Jason is doing for Fresh Hope is that he is, in fact, starting Fresh Hope for Pastors, which is a particular division of Fresh Hope that is focused on helping pastors. And this is pretty important stuff right now with everything that's gone on in the world and how things have really changed for churches and a lot of stress on clergy. Jason, could you just say a little bit about what's going on with clergy, kind of across the board, that from stuff you've read and research you've run across?
Sure. And I'll go back for just a moment and share a little bit about my own experience over these last 18 months or so of being out of church ministry. My mental health was causing difficulties as I tried to do my job, but being removed from that work now, just the level of anxiety and depression and burnout that I was facing because of ministry, removing some of that stress has caused a little bit of a renaissance, I guess. I've come back to life in some ways because
Mm,
ministry at times was doing more damage, more harm to my relationships than my mental illness was.
mm,
And so I've been able to take a look at that and talk to some of my coaching clients, for example, and realize the majority of my pastor friends, guys that I'm coaching, are living with a perpetual low level anxiety. They describe being foggy, not able to focus,
mm,
just waiting for something to go wrong all the time.
mm-hmm,
And so, and it's not just anecdotal material. The rate at which I think I was reading something from Barna that talked about how the rate of depression, anxiety, and other mental health concerns among pastors is almost double what it is for the general population.
mm,
I think the anxiety rate is closer to 30%, and the general public is 18%.
mm,
And so it may not be as much as double, but across the board, pastors are dealing with more spiritual, relational, emotional, mental concerns than most people. We
mm.
work too much. We typically work in isolation. We don't really spend a lot of time caring for one another. One of the things I was listening to Barna, there was an organization called Resilient Leadership, and in partnership with Barna, they held a webinar this week. And one of the things they talked about is just the lack of connectedness for pastors.
Oh,
But
yeah.
this was the same study that a lot of people have heard about. 38% of pastors right now considering considering seriously leaving the ministry, and that
Mm,
number is high at 38. Prior to the pandemic, though, it was at about 20%. We're kind of in that perpetual mode of wondering if they should be in ministry or not.
so it's
But
nearly
that
increased by 100%.
Yeah, and that call, the crisis of calling was what they talked about a lot in this webinar, and this is a lot of the conversations I have. I'll get on the phone with somebody who maybe I'm meeting for the first time for coaching, and they'll just say, "I'm not sure if I'm called to this. I'm not sure if I should stay at my job anymore." And one of the things they brought up, and one of the things I've heard a lot from pastors, we are now in this complex cultural moment where not just the pandemic, but so much of the social and political unrest,
Mm-hmm.
pastors are dealing with things that they've never dealt with before. And one of the books I always recommend people read if they want to learn more about what pastors go through is a book called Resilient Ministry. And within that book, it talks about some of these issues that we are, as pastors, expected to wear all of these different hats. we're expected to know about all of these different subjects, and everything we do and everything we're supposed to say, we're supposed to be experts in all of those categories.
Yeah.
And I felt that when I was in church planning, I would have people upset with me about something that maybe I misunderstood or miscommunicated. And I just kind of sat there and thought, I was taught theology and learned how to teach and preach and evangelize. There are a lot of things that I learned, but as a church planner, I was essentially a business owner,
Yeah.
and I'd never been trained how to do all these different chores in order to run a new organization. And so
Right.
there are all these things thrown at us. I don't think people realize a lot of times that your church may look healthy and things may look peaceful to the casual observer, but there are always crises going on behind the scenes, and it's tough work. And we really want to see with Fresh Hope for Pastors, we want men and women who are in ministry to be able to live, just have a lifetime of fruitful ministry, to be
Yeah.
able to remain resilient in the midst of all the different things that we deal with. And it really is challenging.
Do you mind just give us the purpose of Fresh Hope for Pastors? Why have we created a unique and carved out a division of Fresh Hope for pastors specifically?
For one, because I love pastors, you love pastors, and we want them to be well. But we've said that we're committed to nurturing the spiritual, relational, emotional, and mental well-being of church leaders and their loved ones. We need to care for the loved ones as well,
Mm-hmm.
because ultimately it really does enrich the vitality of the church and the ministries of the church. If we want to be on mission and really follow after what God has for us in this world, we need healthy pastors, and
Mm-hmm.
healthy churches are led by healthy pastors. And so
Mm-hmm.
it is for pastors, it is for churches. It is really kind of a comprehensive viewpoint where we want to both equip church leaders, but also encourage them along the way.
And it's not specifically for pastors who have a mental health issue. It's for pastors, period, because there's so many emotional, mental health, it's a whole package, right?
Absolutely. And part of what you and I've talked about before is, you can say a lot of things with stats, and maybe create a case that isn't as severe as it sounds. But there's one study that found that 90% of the pastors they spoke to and ministry leaders that were in the survey, 90% reported perpetual and constant cycles of burnout.
Mm.
And burnout does so many things to us. It affects our sleep. It can actually trigger all kinds of mental and emotional health concerns, just the burnout itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so with those numbers so high, I don't know a single pastor who hasn't reached a point of burnout at some time during their ministry.
Sure.
And so with all those challenges and all the stress that comes along with the work, every single pastor and ministry leader under the sun needs support. And we need especially peer support from people who understand what it's like to do
Right.
vocational work.
And specifically groups will be geared to pastors, and because of confidentiality and those kinds of things, I think that's important for people to know up front. Now, the one thing that I want to say in regards to that stress, as well as just that cycle of experiencing burnout, is going to change brain chemistry. It's
Yep,
going to mess
absolutely.
with your brain chemistry. So, Jason, tell me what the pieces are that you're going to offer for pastors and their spouses. What are the things that you're going to do within Fresh Hope for Fresh Hope for Pastors?
Well, let's talk about the one that you and I and the team are excited about. We have our Healing the Heart Wounds of Ministry retreat. We're writing curriculum, planning out that retreat for April 21st to 23rd in the Phoenix area. This is something we just want to do on a regular basis, is be able to host retreats and these kind of intensive weekends where, for one, there's just a bit of respite for pastors and spouses But to be able to dig in, like with the healing the heart wounds, we're really going to go deep into things that tend to hijack us in ministry, those wounds that come back up, but also those new wounds that are inflicted. We talk about the sheep having teeth, and it can be hard to really, I think we put Band-Aids on our wounds very often. We don't get a lot of healing. And so we're going to walk with pastors and spouses and just talk about some of the things that we face that are unique to our job and our calling and in the life that we lead. And just talk about the ways that trauma have affected us, how past hurts have affected us, and ministry just doesn't turn out to be what we expected it to be. And so there's a lot of grief and just a lot to process along the way. And for the most part, I can tell you, and you probably felt the same way, I went for stretches where I put my head down, worked for 2 weeks at a time, never took a day off, never processed a thing. And so you're dealing with just, we were talking about it, you're dealing with good change, you're dealing with loss, you're dealing with different things, and you just kind of keep going, and all those things build up, and there's residual. And
right. And we're not looking for pastors who are in crisis at this point. We're really looking for pastors and their spouses who have experienced enough bumps and bruises from ministry and hurts that have happened because of ministry. And the goal is to help people process those things, but also specifically to give you tools to use in the future when there are new hurts or new wounds, so that you can be resilient, right? In ministry.
The goal is always, I think, we've done a pretty poor job of being proactive within the church in general. I think a lot of times we're reactive, we're responding to things that have gone poorly. My counselor friends all tell me by the time a lot of their couples come in, for example, when they hit the crisis, it's too late. And we needed to do some of this work years before. And so that's what we want to do, is be able to be proactive, provide some of those resources that lead to just an ability to keep going when you feel like you're losing your hope and joy. And that's the same deal when it comes to, we do some coaching. I love coaching pastors. It's just really one of my passions, one of my favorite things to do. And just the opportunity to give space and really safety to men and women who are serving in ministry. There's not a lot of safety to be able to talk to folks in your congregation, for example.
Right.
And so providing that space just to share honestly, and then be able to say, okay, if you continue down this path, here's some things that I think could go wrong. Let's try to redirect. Let's try to implement some different resources. Like I have all of my coaching clients, I have them study this thing called the 7 types of rest, and then implement that kind of rest into their lives and try to step back far enough where their minds can work better, where that brain chemistry you're talking about can actually function right. And so we do that in the cohorts. We're also, you mentioned that with the retreat, and a lot of what we do is for all people who are in ministry, not those who have mental health concerns or conditions. At the same time, we are starting groups specifically for people like you and me who are trying to manage a mood disorder while leading a church.
Okay, so let's just pause right there and back up just a hair and clarify and simplify this for those of you who are listening. There is a pilot program that we're starting that will be for pastors and their spouses in general, called Healing the Heart Wounds. So that's a pilot program. We hope to be training facilitators and running that program all throughout not just the United States, but wherever people might want them. So if that's something you're interested in, you could certainly contact Jason. And his email's quite easy. It's like everybody else's. It's jason@freshhope.us. Just contact him if you're interested in that. Maybe you're the leader of a denomination or have some responsibility over pastors or as their caregiver, and this would be something you might want to check into. Now, Jason moved on to another thing that he's doing, and that is the groups, the cohort groups, correct?
Yeah.
And
I get
that's,
excited, Brad, and I just start talking about everything all at once.
I know, and I do the same thing. So be very specific about what the intent and purpose of those groups are.
Yeah. So when one of the things that happens, and I've had friends who've had this happen, where they've gone to their leadership team and said, I'm really dealing with some depression. I can't seem to shake it. And I think maybe this might be a chronic condition. That's a dangerous thing to do. I know people who've lost their jobs. I know people who have lost reputation. They've had suddenly grave concern where nobody was so worried about them before. And we want these cohorts just to be opportunities for people who've never been able to just say that and talk to somebody about it. It is hard to manage a mental health condition. Ministry exacerbates symptoms. Stress and lack of sleep do so much damage to us when we're trying to stay healthy. And so we just want to provide an avenue for folks who are dealing specifically with disorders and illnesses to sit and talk about it with others who can empathize and share experiences. We'll kind of reflect on some things that are happening in life. We'll talk about various topics. There are all kinds of new things coming out all the time. We're learning more about how our brains work and how we function in relationships and things of that nature. And so we'll talk about topics. It'll be very similar to just regular Fresh Hope groups, modeled in that same way.
So what are you calling that in particular? Are you calling it cohort groups, or are you calling it Fresh Hope for Pastor groups?
Yeah, we've just been calling it Fresh Hope for Pastors cohorts.
Okay.
And
great.
Trying to get those up and running.
And with that one, somebody that would attend that would be experiencing some kind of mental health issue, correct?
Yeah. Yep. Correct.
Okay. And they could get a hold of you also through Jason at freshhope.us. Now, there is a landing page for Fresh Hope for Pastors. Do you mind giving that to us? Do you know what that is off the top of your head?
Well, I'm looking at it. It's freshhope.us and then /fresh-hope-for-pastors. And that'll take you there. But you can also get there from the front page. If you look at the menu and for different kind of groups we have, it'll direct you there as well. But
is that for a number 4 or the word for?
Just the word for.
Okay, great. Yeah. Now, you also have other plans to do some blogging, right? As well as some, the two of us are going to probably have a podcast for pastors here that'll be coming out soon also.
Yeah, and you and I will talk about some of the interesting things that we've experienced over the years.
Yes, run across.
Ways that and probably funny things that have happened to others and to us.
Yep.
But we'll also have some guests come on. You and I both know people who live in the world of pastor care, and we have some friends from seminaries and universities, and then just what I'm excited about for us is just to be able to have some pastors come on and talk about their own just their own journey and how they have remained resilient and continued on even in the face of all of the things that can come up from the day to day for pastors and families and all that they cope with.
Yeah. Yep. So, folks, there's going to be a number of things. Now, those of you who are regular listeners to Fresh Hope for Mental Health, you're probably saying, wait a minute, this is for pastors. Well, our hope is that you'll have listened to this and pass it on to your pastor and ask him to give it a listen. And, the thing is that many pastors suffer in silence. They never tell about it. And many times that undealt with pain and heart wounds that have not been tended to show up. And they either show up in behavior or dysfunctional things. And sometimes they disrupt a whole church because it wasn't dealt with. And so we really want to help pastors be better pastors and be in it for the long haul.
Well, one thing I wanted to tell you, Brad, is there's another, Barna does lots of great studies on pastors, and there was another one where they talked about avoiding burnout and how to have all the segments of your life in a healthier place. And meeting with someone else just once a month reduces your chance of burnout by almost half.
Wow.
And so people who meet together once a month, people who meet together a couple times a month, whether it's one-on-one or a group setting, you see this exponential change and this drop in the potential of not only burnout, but moral failure, quitting ministry, all of these things that we get concerned about. Just the contact that we have peer-to-peer changes things dramatically. It transforms lives. I have a friend who I was talking to his wife. She said, we've been doing ministry 25, 30 years, and he's in a cohort for the first time, and it has changed his life and it has changed our family. So
isn't that
stories
something?
are real and powerful, and that's what we want to be a part of.
I'll never forget, I went to a workshop years and years ago. This was when Bill Hybels was just starting to be Bill Hybels, and Rick Warren was just beginning to be Rick Warren. And it was on
before.
Well, it was on caring for yourself as a pastor. And so, it was all about taking care of yourself. And I was with a group of Lutheran pastors, of course, and we were having a glass of wine together with our wives, and we were sitting in a gigantic circle. This was in the evening, and one of the guys in front of the entire group, another pastor, looks at me and he says, "So Brad, when are you going to work on your issues?" And I thought,
which one?
I was so defensive. It wasn't even funny because I didn't want anybody to know I had issues. And that's kind of how we live as pastors. And it certainly wasn't going to be safe in that group to start talking about any issues I might have. So we're hoping to create just the opposite for pastors and just the opposite for their spouses. And we don't have to tell any denominational leaders anything, in the sense of, as long as we're not hearing about illegal things that we would have to report, I suppose, we're going to have a safe environment for pastors. And we're quite excited about the retreat coming up and starting those. We feel the need is for now, right now. Pastors need it. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for being with me today. And I'm sure we'll talk many times again. And of course, we'll have a new podcast starting, Fresh Hope for Pastors podcast, and that'll be fun.
It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah. For those of you who've been listening, thank you so much. We're glad that you listened. Please pass this on to a church leader. Please pass it on to somebody in ministry that you know about that might be encouraged by hearing this. Now, we'd really like to hear from you about our regular podcast, Fresh Hope for Mental Health, topics you'd like covered, questions that you might have. We'll take them as we can. You can find us all over the place on social media, Twitter, YouTube channel, all kinds of places. And if you are listening to this podcast on iTunes, I would ask for you to do a favor, and that is to leave a comment about the podcast that you've listened to today. It just helps others to find us. Now, if you're looking for a Fresh Hope group or you'd like to join the online Fresh Hope network, just go to freshhope.us, freshhope.us. We have books, we have resources, and we have ways for people to connect. Would you do me one other favor, and that is share this podcast or tell your friends about this podcast or share it with them. Now, until the next time, may the Lord fill you with His hope, fresh and new daily. I'm Brad Hafes, and this has been another edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health.
You've been listening to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. If you have an opportunity, please review, share, and subscribe to the Fresh Hope for Mental Health podcast on iTunes or on the service that you use. We encourage you to share our podcast on social media with your friends and family. Previous podcasts of Fresh Hope for Mental Health can be found at freshhopeformentalhealth.com, iHeartRadio, Stitcher Radio, and iTunes. Fresh Hope is one of the leading networks of faith-based peer support groups internationally. For more information about Fresh Hope, go to freshhope.us.